Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Team USA wins again and is now just one game away from the gold medal match. We'll talk about Anthony Edwards' role and yet another Team USA win, again at the top of the charts in terms of shots attempted and scoring. We'll break down Ant's performance and Team USA's show, and it's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs are now over and we're just in Olympics and soon to be back to WNBA baseball, that's all that's happening right now. In the summer, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily right now. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And this is the post-game pod from Team USA's quarterfinals win over Team Brazil on Tuesday afternoon. We're going to talk all about that game. We'll talk about Ant's performance and what I saw in this one as we lead now into Team USA Serbia on Thursday. And then I also want to talk a little Western Conference power rankings. NBA.com has a West power rankings up on their site from John Schumann. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show too. First, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right, so Team USA came into play on Tuesday. It was quarterfinals. They took on Brazil, who was just 1-2 in pool play, but because of the way pool play lines out, they still advanced into, or one of the 8 teams of the initial 12 that advanced into the, I guess, the actual bracket in France. And Brazil was always going to be one of the worst teams in this tournament, frankly. Obviously, they've had good teams in the past. This was not that. There was only one current NBA player on Team Brazil, and not a player of consequence in the NBA. And a couple of former NBA players, Bruno Caboclo, Raul Neto, I guess. There's not a whole lot there in terms of actual NBA caliber talent. And that showed through very early and very often in this game. Now, I want to say this was easily the easiest game Team USA has played so far in France. The Serbia, all three really ended up being blowouts. They were blowouts. They're all 100 and something to 80 something. The Serbia game was maybe the one that got out of hand the quickest, even though it was the best team they'd played to this point. South Sudan was a relatively close game, and they were very good. Puerto Rico was never really close, but they ended up beating Brazil by a full 35 points. And it was really never close. The way this thing had, like, early in the game, Team USA jumped out. It was a dominant performance early. And they were only up 5 at the end of the first quarter, but it felt like a lot more than that. And then Brazil pushed back. Really midway through the second quarter, it got down to 12 points. The lead had ballooned over 20. It was 48-36, midway point of the second quarter. And Ant had a relatively short stint and didn't play all that great. We'll talk more about that in a second. And so it was a 12-point game. Basically, starters come back in for Team USA, and then they close the first half on a 15-0 run to go from 12 points to 27 points. Brazil didn't score in the final 5 minutes of the second quarter. And at halftime, Team USA was up, 63-36 was the halftime score after the 15-0 run to close the first half. And this was an across-the-board dominant performance. And I said this after the win over Puerto Rico. The size and athleticism, especially on the perimeter, but really 1 through 5 from everybody on the floor, was just extremely clear. And Team USA was running a ton of post-ups. They were just getting mismatches. They were trying to force switches, get mismatches, and then just dumping the ball down. Not even straight post-ups, just like, hey, I'm going to try and seal this guy. You're going to dump the ball down to me, and I'm going to score over him or get a foul or both. Certainly led to some inside-out But really, Team USA started outside in, was able to dominate both in the paint and on the glass. Ultimately, Team USA was 18 of 32 on 3-point shots. And that's where the biggest discrepancy was. And we'll talk about points in the paint. I'm sorry, I had the wrong. Team USA wasn't quite that good. I looked at the wrong number. 15 of 31 outside the arc. So still 48% outside the arc. And Brazil was just 32%. So that was a massive difference in this game. Points in the paint were also a big difference in this game. Brazil has some quickness on the perimeter, but it's not a, again, I would point to, yes, the size in the inside and in the paint and on the glass. That's all true. Team USA is a plus 12 in the glass. But the size in the perimeter is what really stands out. Whether it's Kevin Durant getting his shot off whenever he wants and against whoever he wants at any point in time, any place on the floor, that's typical. But Devin Booker's pretty big compared to some of these other guards Team USA has seen. Anthony Edwards, a lot bigger than a lot of these other guards Team USA has seen. Jason Tatum, a lot bigger than many of the wings Team USA has seen. It's one of the reasons why LeBron James is basically running point guard for Team USA and has been throughout international competition this year. That's just like LeBron can see over the defense. He can back guys down. We saw him do that a few times in this game where he just creates his own post-up opportunity. And that's always available to Team USA. The size advantage 1 through 5 has been the biggest thing that we could point to so far in the Olympics in France. On defense, Team USA was allowing a little bit of penetration. It was weird. It was almost like they were like, I don't mean to disrespect Brazil, but it was almost like they were toying with them in a sense. And it's not always a winning strategy, but they were like not doing a great job on the initial point of attack. Team USA wasn't. It was fine, but it wasn't great. And then on penetration, they would just kind of collapse the defense and knock the ball away. I mean, they had several turnovers forced from Brazil doing that. Brazil ended up with 15 turnovers in the game. Team USA had 7 blocks. You could have told me it was 14. You could have told me it was twice that. I wouldn't have been shocked. They had 7 blocks, by the way. Brazil only blocked 1 shot of the United States in this game. So it was really, they were allowing a little bit too much dribble penetration, but then the defense would collapse, knock the ball away, and have really good off-ball activity, good activity on the glass, good job jumping passing lanes. It was almost like the 4 guys who weren't guarding the ball were really on point to this game and did a great job of collapsing, deflections, etc. And ultimately, the shot selection for Brazil just turned into difficult mid-range jumpers and long 3-point attempts. Like I bet the average distance on their 3-point attempts was 3, 4, 5 feet beyond the arc. Like there were barely any, at least in the first, when the game was in doubt, the first, call it half, 3/4 of the game, there were barely any open spot up 3-point attempts for Brazil. They were all long threes, either at the end of the shot clock or like, hey, there's actually not a hand in my face. I guess I'll shoot this from 28 feet. Or they were contested mid-range jumpers. There was a lot of that for Brazil in this game. Team USA forced them into some really, really tough shots. And Brazil, I mean, like Bruna Caboclo, of course, former NBA player, had 30 points. DePaula off the bench had 15. Nobody else was in double figures for Brazil in this game. They just could not get good shots off. And again, point of attack was okay, but I think it was more the help defense and the defense collapsing than it was anything else for Team USA that forced Brazil into these tough shots. So for me, the biggest thing was, again, the size advantage on the perimeter and activity off the ball defensively that were most impressive to me. Team USA using their size to benefit them in every aspect of the half-court offense. Yeah, they had 31 assists. They had 15 made threes. They had a bunch of points in the paint. They also had 11 offensive rebounds in this game. Adebayo and Anthony Davis off the bench combined for 7 offensive rebounds for Team USA. All right, I want to talk about Anthony Edwards' performance next. We'll talk about what's upcoming. Remind you what happened against Serbia the last time Team USA saw them, which was just a week ago in the first game of pool play. And then we'll close by talking a little bit of Western Conference power rankings, turning things back to the NBA. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. And I could tell you firsthand, my kids, there's always something. My kids aren't even all that old, but there's always something that one or both of them have. And my wife and I are running everywhere. And, it seems like non-negotiables. But what if we made self-care non-negotiable? Sometimes even when you know what makes you happy, it's really hard to make time for it. And even when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy might just be more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Again, self-care really should be non-negotiable, and therapy is a great way to go about that. Never skip therapy day, just like you never want to skip leg day, right? Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, for your second listen, you could go over and enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA. The Locked On NBA Locked On NBA show provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So Anthony Edwards' performance, barely talked about him so far. And yes, he once again led Team USA in shot attempts off the bench, or shot attempts full stop, like the most shot attempts. Yes, he came off the bench. Most shot attempts, tied for the most minutes played. Second in points, just 1 point behind Devin Booker. And if you didn't watch the game, you'd say, oh man, Ant was a big part of building this lead. Not really. I think he had 5 points at halftime. This was a lot of, he got a lot of, I think he played the whole fourth quarter. He played just like a short 6-7 minute stint in the first half. I thought he actually forced some shots. His first shot attempt, he just came down in transition, was like, all right, I guess I'll shoot this. Missed it. Had another kind of forced shot mixed in there. And then he hit a step back three because I think it was a pick and roll, and both defenders went with the roller, and he found himself wide open, top of the key, made the jumper. Also had a bucket in transition. So he had, I do think it was 5 points at halftime, but all of his misses were kind of forced, not really in rhythm. It was like he was trying to shoot himself into rhythm like he might do in a Wolves game. Not necessary or really helpful in the Olympics. And I thought Steve Kerr had a bit of a shorter leash with him in the first half. Not like it was panic time. They were up double figures, but it was a bit of a shorter stint than we've seen from him previously with Team USA. Second half, he got in, latter part of the third quarter was good, and then played basically the whole fourth quarter and really kind of found his stride as the game wore on. And it was basically glorified garbage time at that point, but he ended up shooting 6 of 10, 3 of 7 on threes, which by the way means he was 3 of 3 on twos. So 7 of his 10 shot attempts were threes in this game for Ant. He's been all over the map in terms of his shot distribution, threes versus twos in this series so far, or in this, I should say, in the Olympics so far. So 3 of 3 on twos, 3 of 7 on threes, 6 of 10 overall, 2 of 2 at the line, 5 boards, 2 assists, 1 steal for Anthony Edwards in this one. And I thought his activity on the glass was good. He ended up fourth on the team in rebounds. The 2 assists were both solid plays that he made. He had a couple of nice passes that should have been assists that the potential beneficiary did not make the shot. I thought in the second half, it was a little bit of like, hey, you're the alpha. I should also point out, we talked about this before. He is being given every opportunity to just run the bench offense. Like Kevin Durant's on the floor, and sometimes Derek White's on the floor, but they just mostly headman the ball to Anthony Edwards, and he's the one kind of pulling the strings of the offense. And a couple times it was just dump the ball into KD, give him the ball at the free throw line, extended high post, let him go to work as he does. And that's a lot of what this entails, but it also gives Anthony Edwards the ability to probe, to pick his spots to attack, to shoot pull-up jumpers. And we all know that Ant's happy to do all of the above. And I think in the first half, he wasn't pushing the right buttons. He wasn't making all those right choices. Second half, he was much better with it. And obviously the game was not close at that point. But Steve Kerr's putting a lot on him. And this is, of course, at this point, this is like effectively a one and done situation. Yeah, if you lose in the next round, you're in the bronze medal game, but that's not the goal here, right? So this is a lot of trust being put on Anthony Edwards. And in this game, it was never in doubt. So it was never really a concern. But something to keep an eye on, just how those minutes distributions, like in this game, all 5 starters played between 12 and 17 minutes. And besides Tyrese Haliburton, who only played 8, the rest of the bench players played between 16 and 21. So the bench players played more minutes than the starters in this game by far because of the blowout nature of it. But curious to see what as we, and also the Serbia matchup, which we'll talk about here in a second, is an interesting one too. You'd think the U.S. would need a little bit more size. Well, actually, let's get to that in just a second. Let's do studs and duds real quick. I talked about Ant. There's not much else to say because so much of what he did wasn't garbage time. Studs, Devin Booker was really good in this game. 5 of 7 on 3-pointers, 6 of 9 overall. He had 18 points on just 9 shots with only 1 free throw. 3 assists, 3 boards, only 1 turnover in just 15 minutes. So 18 points on 9 shots in 15 minutes for Devin Booker. By far the best he's played in this tournament, and was really impressive. LeBron also gets a stud. 12 points on 5 of 6 shooting, 9 assists, 3 boards, 3 steals. He did have 4 turnovers. He's been real high turnover in Paris, but 12 points on 6 shots in 17 minutes, plus the 9 assists and 3 steals, 3 boards. That will play for LeBron. And then I guess I'd go with Joel Embiid. I mean, like, you could go Embiid, you could still go Anthony Davis. I'll go Embiid. He was really good early. He knocked down 3 threes. He had 14 points, 7 boards. Good to see him play well in front of, a still booing crowd, to the point he played so well, they ended up not actually booing him as much in the second half. He only played 12 minutes, 14 points on 6 shots in 12 minutes for Joel Embiid. So Embiid, LeBron, Devin Booker are my 3 studs in this game. Again, Ant very good off the bench. Anthony Davis very good. Really, everybody played well. No duds in this game. Jason Tatum was really the only one to have a bad shooting night, 1 of 5. Derek White was 2 of 6, 1 of 4 outside the arc. But start to finish, really impressive, solid performance for Team USA. Let's talk about Serbia. So Team USA plays Serbia now on Thursday afternoon, 2 p.m. Central. And Serbia just won. Let's see. They beat Australia in overtime by 5, so knocking out Joe Ingles. And I should also mention, well, actually, we'll get to Gobert here in a second. I want to talk about Gobert in France. But Serbia is still in it. They beat Australia. Now Team USA has to face Serbia again. Remember, game 1 of the Olympics, Team USA had a 9-point halftime lead, pulled away in the third quarter, ultimately won the game by 26 points. Jokic had 20 points, 8 assists, 5 boards, 4 steals in that game. Nobody else had more than 14 points for Serbia. Embiid didn't play great. He only played 11 minutes, only had 4 points in that game. That was the game when Kevin Durant couldn't miss. 23 points, 8 of 9 shooting, 5 of 5 outside the arc to start the Team USA's play in France. And then LeBron had 21, 9, and 7, threatened triple-double in 27 minutes. So this was the LeBron Durant show with a little bit of Steph Curry, Steph using his gravity to pull guys away and impact the game in that way, even though he only scored 11 points. Steph has just not been a high scorer so far in the Olympics. Anthony Davis really good off the bench. Ant was fine, 11 and 5 off the bench, 4 of 6 shooting, a couple of made threes. So well-rounded performance when Team USA beat Serbia last time around. The keys here are they need Embiid and Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo to come to play. Serbia is big and physical. They out-physicaled South Sudan. They out-physicaled Australia ultimately. That is what they're going to do. It's going to be a knockout, drag-out fight. Team USA this is like a team where, yes, there's an athleticism advantage. Yes, there's overall a shooting advantage, certainly. I mean, they shot over 55% from the field, or excuse me, from 3-point range last time they played Serbia. They've got more outside shooters. But Serbia is going to play a bruising game. Team USA has to be able to withstand that. That's Thursday afternoon. It's this one, and then Germany potentially in the gold medal game. Those are the 2 toughest matchups that Team USA is going to have. And as easy as it was the first time around, we can't expect it to necessarily be as easy this next time around. On the other side of the bracket, Germany beat Greece, which was not surprising. So Giannis is out. That was a 13-point win for Germany. Germany is probably the toughest matchup for for Team USA moving forward. That's the first time I've done that in a few shows. So, not too bad to not call Team USA Minnesota or the Wolves more often than I have. And then in the other game, France upset Canada. Gobert in France beats Canada by 9. Of course, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Canada out now. Gobert only played 3 minutes off the bench. He didn't start for Team France, and there were kind of, I don't want to say conflicting reports. Initially, they just said it's matchups. He didn't start. Ultimately, they came out and said, yeah, he had I think Gobert, the way he put it was he was on the operating table on Monday with his finger. Ultimately, their coach said he didn't actually have surgery. Um, and like, anyway, I guess he had a ring finger in a splint. He played only 3 minutes, had a rebound. That was it. Said he'll be ready to play in their next game, in the semifinal game. So Gobert did not have much of an impact. And really, like, Wembanyama only had 2 made buckets. He had 7 and 12, played 27 minutes, and played well overall for France. But it was a lot of the guards. It was non-NBA players or former NBA players that made an impact for France. And Canada just did not. Like, Dylan Brooks never got going in the Olympics. He was 1 of 9 in this game. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had 27 points on 19 shots. RJ Barrett had 16. Nobody else had more than 7 points. They got 27 from SGA, 16 from RJ Barrett. Nobody else had double digits. Nickeil Alexander-Walker played just 3 minutes off the bench. So neither Nickeil or Gobert had much of an impact in this game. And Joe Ingles, of course, didn't do much for Australia in the tournament either. So now we have Germany and France on one side of the bracket. We have Team USA and Serbia on the other. Most likely scenario, I think, is Germany, Team USA. But intriguing matchups here in the semis on Thursday. So, of course, Friday's show will be a post-game pod. We'll talk all about it then. So a lot to cover there. I want to close today by talking West Conference Power Rankings by John Schumann over at NBA.com. I was a little bit surprised by how those came together. So we'll cover that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs are now over and we are into just Olympics and not a whole lot else going on besides baseball, we do get fewer games overall. The sports simply aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And I'll tell you what, Olympic basketball has been fun for that. Team USA, of course, still heavy favorites to win the gold. Odds on Germany aren't awful. Like, I'd take a look at Germany as well. If you're not picking Team USA, I guess Germany, Serbia would be pretty intriguing as well, between the two of them, that matchup itself. But anyway, you could do that. You could look at, you could bet on who's going to win the bronze. Like, all those different kind of combinations are pretty interesting. Throughout the summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right. So over at NBA.com, my favorite power rankings by far are done over there by John Schumann, who I think does a fantastic job for NBA.com. If you listen to the show regularly during the regular season, I do not often cite power rankings because they're so noisy. Nobody can really truly have a great grasp on every team in the league all at once. And a lot of times they're just kind of like half-baked. John Schumann does a really good and thorough job at NBA.com. So those are the ones that I'll occasionally bring up during the regular season. He typically will put offensive rating, defensive rating, net rating, pace, fun little tidbits from the week, bigger picture from the season. All that stuff goes into his in-season power ranking. So he did an off-season edition. I think last Friday he did the Eastern Conference, and then early this week he did Western Conference. And I don't know, like, I like John Schumann, and I think he does a great job. But I don't really get these rankings. And he doesn't give any sort of a reasoning behind, like, hey, this is just based on what's happened in the offseason. This is just right now in the offseason power rankings. So I expect the Wolves to be second, maybe third, because, hey, Dallas went to the finals. I get it. But they're not. They're lower than that. So OKC's number one. And, he, of course, cites the additions of Caruso and Hartenstein and Hartenstein, excuse me. And I get it. Makes sense. He talks about Caruso being a great fit, and they need to get more three-pointers up, and hopefully the combination of Caruso and SGA and Jalen Williams could do that. Number two really surprised me. Okay, the Denver Nuggets at number 2, up 3 spots from the last time we did a power ranking for the Western Conference. So this really surprised me, because even as listed here, key departures, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Reggie Jackson. We know that those guys were significant rotation pieces for Michael Malone and the Nuggets. Their additions are Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric. Not exactly major impact guys at this stage in their respective careers. And he doesn't even list any reason for why they're so high. He has a couple interesting numbers. The Nuggets were the only team that had a winning record in games in which they were outscored from three-point range. Kind of random. They have the second best defense against the league's top 10 offenses. Be pretty willing to bet the Wolves are number one. And the Nuggets starters played more time together than any other lineup in the last 6 seasons. And then he talks about Westbrook being a wild card, and is Christian Brown ready to take on more of a role because KCP's gone? I get it. You have Jokic, but the Wolves beat the Nuggets in the playoffs. The Nuggets did less to improve their team, I would argue, than the Timberwolves did. And yeah, they lost Slow-Mo, but I think the potential impact of Rob Dillingham and TJ Shannon is greater than Dario Saric and Russell Westbrook. I'm not sure there's much of a question about that. Dallas is number 3 on this list. Of course, they added Klay Thompson, Najee Marshall. They lost Derek Jones Jr., Josh Green, and Tim Hardaway. I think the defense is a little fluky there. I do think Klay Thompson is a great fit for them. I've talked about this before. I just think that a lot of stuff fell into place for them. And I'm just surprised. All 3 of those teams are ahead of Minnesota. He's got the Wolves at 4. And then actually he has a point here I made on the show several times. I talked about this a lot towards the end of the regular season. I'll just read what he has. The Wolves allowed 2.2 fewer points per 100 possessions than the league's second best defense last year. The third biggest differential in the 28 seasons for which you have play-by-play data. It's just what I keep saying is it's the second time in the last 20 years. See if I still have my note here. I think it was the Spurs. The Spurs of 15-16 are the only team that has a better mark. And I think the Milwaukee Bucks of the 1920 season had the same differential there. So that's a point I made on the show before. So there we go. So that's why I like John. He and I are on the same wavelength here. Wolves also the league's best record in games they trail by double digits, and the conference finals are their second worst 5-game stretch of defense all season. That's not surprising. Of course, competition gets tougher the later you play into the playoffs, and they had to face Luka Doncic. So that was difficult and a tough matchup. He does talk about the potential jump from Edwards, how he became more efficient as the season went on, which is interesting because I think everybody saw he got pretty tired in the playoffs. He was better in terms of assist to turnover in the playoffs. I think part of that was he just didn't pass the ball as much. He did a lot more for himself. But he needs to continue to improve. And the Wolves, as Schumann puts it, push the Wolves into the top half of the league offensively. Like they need to be a top half offense, which is a perfectly reasonable expectation. He also talks about the how much longer Mike Conley can hold up as a starter. And then he says the defense should still be there despite the loss of a critical contributor in Kyle Anderson on that side of the floor. I should note the Phoenix Suns are 5th on this list, which also surprised me. They're up 7 spots from the last rankings. They added Tyus Jones, Monte Morris, and Mason Plumlee. So a couple of former Timberwolves there, and of course switched their coach. I was a little surprised they were as high up on there. He's got the Pelicans at 6, the Warriors at 7, Sacramento at 8, the Clippers at 9, of course, dropping 5 spots in the wake of the loss of Paul George, and to a lesser extent, Russell Westbrook, Mason Plumlee. Memphis at 10, and of course, depending on how Ja Morant looks, that could be even higher. Houston at 11, the Lakers all the way down to 12. Basically, nothing happened there. They made no changes. They lost Taurean Prince. They drafted Dalton Connect. That's it. And the Spurs are at 13, the Jazz at 14, Blazers at 15. So that's how he has the Western Conference laying out. I don't necessarily disagree with the rest of it. I think having Denver second, if you want to put Dallas second, fine. I get it. Finals momentum, Klay Thompson. Put the Wolves third. So I'm quibbling a little because I'm talking about a spot. But still, surprised to see the conference finalists with the most exciting and rapidly improving young player nowhere near his prime, currently excelling for Team USA, to put them fourth after going to the conference finals really surprised me. But we'll see where all that shakes out at the start of the regular season here this fall. All right. No show tomorrow. We'll have a show Friday. That will be the post-game pod following Team USA and Serbia on Thursday. And hopefully this time Friday, we'll be talking about Team USA in the gold medal game against either Germany or Team France. And perhaps we get a Rudy Gobert, Anthony Edwards showdown in the gold medal game, which no doubt will give us some good content. Whether it's press conferences or on-court content, who knows? We can only imagine. So stay tuned for that. We'll talk about that on Friday. And then, of course, we'll be back with you again next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. You can go check out the Locked On NBA podcast next, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description of this show, so you don't need to go search for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.